Hi, everybody. My name's Harry Vaughn. I'm a senior programmer for the Sundance Film Festival. It is my pleasure to get to have a conversation with filmmaker Sam Hopkinson, who directed Misha and the Wolves, which has world premiered in our World Cinema Documentary Competition for the 2021 Film Festival. Sam is a very talented filmmaker. One of his most recent projects, Fear City, premiered on Netflix as one of their original documentaries. We were thrilled to get to show this twisty and turny documentary at the festival. Sam, thanks for being here. And thank you to the Jewish Film Institute for having us.
Thanks for having me.
So gosh, the question is, how do we talk about Misha and the Wolves without giving too much away, without creating spoilers? Because this film is filled with revelations that I don't necessarily want to give away, but they also seem to be intrinsically a part of the conversation about what this film is. So, Sam, how do we do this?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I suppose it's probably apt to talk about the structure of the film in a way, because the film is structured to try not to give things away. You know, it's about the film is sort of structured in the way that we wanted to peel back layers of truth on a subject, and with every peel, so to speak, new things are revealed. Mm-hmm. That was the way I wanted to play it. And obviously that allows you to twist and turn, you know, things are held back. And I mean, I think it won't be a surprise to anyone who's seen it or not, if you've read a little bit about it, to know that it is about a Holocaust memoir that was found to be untrue. I don't think I'll be giving that away to anyone.
Okay, so we know that is something we can talk about.
Let's at least give them that.
Great. Okay, that makes our lives a little easier then. Because one of the things I wanted to ask was how you entered the story, how much you knew going into the story, and what surprised you as you kept filming. Because I know one of the tricks, going back to your structure and what you do so well, is you're interviewing people who know something already. They know something big, but they also have to relive a time when they didn't know this revelation.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. And I think it's one thing to say that this film was quite tightly scripted, for want of a better word. I mean, I knew what the story was going to be. I knew how the story was going to play out before I started to interview people, which is these are the kind of films that I make. And so there you go into an interview with a very particular goal, I guess. And it was important for me to get the trust of the interviewees, I suppose, to tell the story from within the story.
Right.
So to try and tell the story without hindsight. You know, what did you know at that particular time? What did you feel? Tell me the story of what you experienced at that particular time, which allows the viewer to move temporally through the story with the characters. And you know, that was important to me. So I suppose making this kind of film, you go into it with a particular sort of storytelling mode in mind. So that was important. I mean, I found it was. I mean, we're talking about 6 years ago when I stumbled across the story in a small article in a British newspaper about this trial involving a hoax Holocaust.
Yeah. I thought you did that so well in the film, that you have these subjects who befriended and deeply trusted Misha, the woman who wrote this memoir that ended up not being true. And near the end of the film, they get to express how upset they are and how it still lingers. And yet what's so effective is in the first half of the film, especially in the first 30 minutes, they're recollecting something completely different. They're in a totally different mindset. They seem to love Misha. And so I've always wondered how gifted documentary filmmakers as yourself are able to allow your subjects to get into that mindset where they momentarily forget the actual pain they're in because of what the subject has done to them, you know?
I mean, I think it was helpful that the pain was quite a long time ago as well. I think if the pain had been quite recent, it would have been harder to take them back. But you know, I plan for long interviews, and you know, and I think it's important for the subjects to understand how the story is going to be told, and so, as I said, knowing that in advance, I was able to, you know, to let them know how they fitted, how and where they fitted into the story, and they understand, and then I suppose win their trust to understand that this is the way I want to tell the story. So, you know, inevitably, you know, we're obviously not turning up on people's doorsteps and starting to film. You know, there's a nurture, there's a sort of a developing of a relationship that goes on, and you know, and recce's and meetings, etc.
The relationship I'm very curious about. There's a couple, but you have a fascinating and unreliable narrator in Jane, the publisher. This is the woman who discovered Misha's story and very eagerly, you know, encouraged her to write this memoir and put it out into the world. Right off the bat, I feel, you know, as a viewer that she is obscuring things. And yet she is the one for a while investigating this story for us. She's guiding us. But behind her guiding is you guiding all of us as you tell Jane's story with the awareness that she's not always telling necessarily the truth. I'd love to know what that process was like for you, because she's a fascinating character, and the way that you've portrayed her is very multifaceted and kind of endlessly complicated.
Well, I think, you know, I think what interested me in this story and all the characters involved were their motivations, and they are incredibly complex motivations. Jane, interestingly, with Jane, you know, there's a kind of parallel with Jane in a documentary filmmaker, in a sense. She was a publisher who was after a true story that was fantastic, and she wanted to tell it. And I think that interested me in her as a character. But she was one of the first people I contacted. She was the first interview I did, way before the other interviews. I interviewed Jane before we'd actually funded the film, and the interview helped us fund it because she is a great storyteller. And this is a film, you know, I wanted to make a film about storytelling, and it just seemed fitting that she was somebody who'd searched for a great story. She told a great story, and she was the person around which all events circulated in many ways.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because from Jane, so she's the first driver of this investigation to find out what happens, the truth behind Misha's story. But it's driven out of self-interest and a desperation to get out of this lawsuit, right? Where she's in deep, millions of dollars. So for a while, the film is carried by her. I feel like there is this incredible moral shift that happens in the film when the Belgian genealogist and Holocaust survivor, Evelyn, takes over the investigation. And to me, this is where the film becomes more of a profound search for the truth, not just a search so that one can get out of a lawsuit. And I thought maybe you could speak to discovering Evelyn, who is a remarkable character, and securing her trust, and then talking about, I guess, how the film shifted for you once she came into the picture.
We always knew Evelyn was involved, but it wasn't really until we met her in Brussels, myself and Poppy Dixon, the producer, earlier on in the year, that we realized, or earlier on last year, that we realized quite what a wonderful woman she was, what a quietly powerful character she was, and in a way how she could play a larger role than we'd imagined in the film. For anyone who hasn't seen the film, Evelyn is not only a genealogist who helped in the search for Misha's true story, but she is herself a Holocaust survivor, a hidden child. She was hidden in various places as a Jewish child in Brussels in Belgium during the war, grew up believing she was a Catholic girl from a Catholic household, and only later in life discovered the true story about what happened, true and tragic story about what happened to her parents. So in many ways, Evelyn became the film's, what I call her, the film's center of good. She was somebody who you could say was entirely unencumbered by ulterior motive. The reason for her being involved was really sort of curiosity more than anything else. She didn't really stand to gain much one way or another from her involvement in the search, in the story. And what's interesting is because we reveal her to be somebody who suffered greatly during the Holocaust, it sort of seemed fitting for her to be the one who ultimately reflects on what's gone on. So there's a really difficult film to finish, to be honest, because as you say, the motivations of almost everyone involved were slippery and interesting, and it felt wrong to give almost anyone the last word, but it seemed fitting to give Evelyn the last word. So the film ends with Evelyn's trying to get her head around what's happened and the motivations of people. And what's really interesting is she doesn't really come to a huge conclusion, but it's almost my favorite moment in the film where, and it's not spoiling it for anyone to know, where she struggles to articulate what she feels about Misha at the end. And you can, and we play the clip, it plays quite long, and we show her trying to choose her words. And in a way, for me, that not only sums up Evelyn as a character, her sort of humanity and humaneness, if you see what I mean, to try and understand, the motivations of someone who she has every right to be incredibly angry with. But it also sums up the bigger picture, the whole story, that it's ultimately very complex, which you'll understand when you see the whole film if you haven't already.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that moment with Evelyn, because to me, that is the most powerful moment in the film, because Evelyn's entrance and then further investigation not only reveals just how kind of, I guess, disturbing these lies that Misha told was, because Evelyn is a true survivor. She also somehow is the one that tries to understand Misha's motives the best, which is like an incredibly generous thing for someone to do, especially someone like Evelyn, who has been through what Misha lied about. And that to me was a kind of a profound moment that I didn't expect, that I didn't necessarily even need. And then when it happened, I just thought, wow, what a remarkable woman Evelyn is.
I totally agree with you. And if you had the pleasure to meet her, you'd think that twofold, threefold. She is totally full of life. And we had a great, even though the subject was, it's a tricky subject, and but we had great fun with her, filmed with her. I mean, she is someone who has definitely sort of lived life to full, and not only is she sort of good on screen, but it's the fact that she is so thoughtful, and she wasn't going to suffer fools in this film. And it's interesting that actually only yesterday she watched the film for the first time.
Really?
And I was nervous. We knew she was watching it. I was nervous of anybody. And to be honest, we wanted to treat everyone with ultimate fairness with this film, because we knew and understood that people had gone, it was harrowing for everyone. You know, even those who you might call the perpetrators. It was harrowing for everyone. And we wanted to be fair because it was complex. But of all of the people involved, I was most concerned that we felt we treated Evelyn with dignity that she deserved. And she emailed and she really enjoyed the film, which made me hugely relieved, to be honest, because I think as a documentary maker, we and I probably speak for many others who might be watching, that the worst thing you want to do is to make people feel that you've manipulated them or you've taken advantage of them.
That is incredibly important that Evelyn liked the film. I don't blame you for feeling nervous about that, but I will say, even in the interviews that you have with her, there is a levity. I think in the cut I saw, there's laughter in the background with something she says. I think you and the people behind you can't help but laugh. So I sensed a really good vibe between you and Evelyn. I'm very happy that she likes the film. She is, in a lot of ways, the good that you describe. I think what Evelyn does and what you bring up in this film in a larger context is the issue of truth, which is something that we are really, for some reason, struggling in a hugely existential way right now in the world, especially, I can say, especially in the United States because I live here. But there is an issue with people believing and wanting to believe stories that often genuinely don't strike one as plausible or realistic, and yet they catch like wildfire, and they spark the imagination, and it seems so hard to stop an untruth from growing once the seeds are planted. And this is what your film is kind of about.
It's exactly what it's about. And it's you know, and I don't use the analogy anymore because the world has changed, but I remember when I was talking, you know, just before starting to shoot it this time last year, I was sort of saying what interests me about this story is how truth spreads like a virus. Just sounds wrong to say it now, but it's exactly as you said. And what's interesting about this story, it's a story of a story, this, and I was interested, I wanted to make a film about storytelling, as I said, memory and history, and and I suppose, you know, I wanted to locate the viewer in a kind of uneasy space between truth and fiction, because it raises questions about how and why we believe the stories we're told. It's all in the telling. Mm-hmm. It's all in the telling, and weirdly, the more a story gets believed, the more people believe it. It almost should be the other way around, but I think it goes like that. And I think the thing structurally, what really interested me about this was that it's truth. It's a documentary about untruth. So what you're doing is you're inverting the form. Okay, so everyone say, well, documentaries about truth. It's about true stories. But if you say, I'm going to make a documentary about an untruth, then you slightly invert the form. It's almost like the whole debate about, you know, dramas based on true events. You know, but it's going the other way. It's like a documentary based on untrue events. So it allows you as a filmmaker, and allowed me as a filmmaker, to take the film into really interesting places structurally, but also take and hopefully, hopefully kind of function comes out of that form, if you see what I mean, and it communicates something to the audience about truth and how we believe things to be true and then realize that they're not. And so that was exactly what I was trying to do with the way I made it. but it, you know, other films like, you know, that obviously were quite influential on this, films like The Imposter or Stories We Tell, Sarah Polley's documentary about a great sort of family, you know, family sort of stories that turn out to be true or not, who knows? But it's about the stories we tell and how they become gospel.
I'm snickering because I can't reveal the moment in your film that really gets to the heart of that. But I will just say 30 minutes in, for those who haven't seen this film, there is just an absolutely gorgeous, brilliant moment about untruth that Sam crafts, that I look forward to those who haven't seen it yet. I look forward to their reaction, because it's a jaw-dropping moment, and it's a moment we talked endlessly about in the programming room. Sam, I want to thank you for talking with me today about Misha and the Wolves. I think this has been a lovely conversation. If we haven't touched on something that you would like to talk about, I'd love to.
Well, I suppose one thing that I think is really interesting, and as we are at a JFI event, I think what my journey through this has been really interesting. I didn't start out wanting to make a Holocaust documentary. I was interested in this story because it was a story about storytelling. But it became doubly fascinating that here was someone spinning a yarn about their Holocaust experiences, which is slightly playing with fire, you know, so the drama was heightened in terms of the experience for the characters and for the audience. But what I realized was, even though I didn't start out wanting to make a Holocaust film, is I've ended up making a sort of postmodern Holocaust film. And so not a film about the kind of terrible events of the Holocaust, but a film about the whole genre of literature, you know, documentaries, journalism that has grown up, or that is sort of the cultural shadow that the Holocaust has cast, if you see what I mean. You know, the idea of sort of the Holocaust survivor as star, or, you know, their story as commodity, you know, which is part of it, you know, it's part of the industry. It's part of the industry that we are involved in. And I you know, in sort of being within this story for a long time, you know, reading a lot of other, you know, survivors' accounts, books, watching other Holocaust documentaries, you sort of realize that there is this industry. It has to exist. And I'm not, you know, it's not to criticize it, but it's interesting. And I think to some extent, I hope that this film will sort of make people understand that industry a little more in the story and what happened.
Thank you, Sam. I think it does do that. And I think it does quite a lot in terms of storytelling, in terms of how we contextualize the Holocaust. And I hope people get as much out of it as we did in the programming team. We love this film, and we're thrilled that we get to world premiere it at Sundance. So thank you for accepting our invitation.
Great to be here.
Great. Well, thanks a lot for this lovely conversation. And again, thank you to the Jewish Film Institute for organizing this. I hope everyone has a good day.